Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Nickerson, and the purpose of this video is to talk about chronic illness and brain retraining, how those things relate, and whether brain retraining would kind of the why behind it, the how and the why. How is this related to chronic illness? Will this help my chronic illness? I wanted to record this video today because, well, first of all, I'm just having a good hair day. So always a good day to record videos. Two, I get a lot of questions or just inquiries from people, friends, and family members that know about me and know my story and refer people to me that are like, I have this particular chronic illness. Somebody said brain retraining might help. My doctor mentioned DNRS or Gupta, but I don't really understand what that is or why that would help. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you just a very brief kind of intro, some information to see whether this makes sense to you, something you might be interested in. So here is some basic information. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about kind of my story, so you know where I'm coming from here, and then a little bit about the science, and then also at the end, a little bit about what is brain retraining, what does that entail, what would I be signing up for? So let's jump into that. I'm going to share my screen here with you. Let's see, I'm going to move this around. Okay, so you should be able to see that now. Again, my name is Katie Nickerson. I'm a brain retraining coach now, but a little bit about my story. So I had dealt with a chronic illness for about a decade, maybe a little longer, and it started with chronic pain for me and then developed into some chronic fatigue symptoms and a lot of gut issues and brain fog and all sorts of things. After maybe about 5 or 6 years of looking for answers, I was diagnosed with chronic inflammatory response syndrome, CIRS, or mold toxicity. That, is never just one thing with chronic illness usually. So I also dealt with chemical sensitivities and severe fatigue and brain fog and histamine intolerance and food intolerances and MARCoNS and depression and POTS and hormonal imbalances and lots of other things. So I tried a lot. I went and saw some great doctors, went up to a functional medicine clinic in Massachusetts, ended up switching to a Shoemaker certified doctor to treat the mold toxicity. I did that for about 2 years. And the mold toxicity ended up being kind of the most maybe pronounced for me because I developed extreme sensitivities to mold to where if I went into pretty much any building anywhere, I would have pretty automatic symptoms and reactions to that mold. I have this picture of a mattress here on the screen because I flew to Florida from California to Florida to go on vacation or to attempt to go on vacation with my family. And we were staying in this condo. It was supposed to be a very new condo. So I was hoping I wouldn't react to it, but I did. And so I had to pull my mattress outside and sleep on the balcony, which was, I think we were on the 20-something floor. So maybe like the 26th floor of this condo. And I slept outside and then spent the majority of my days outside because of that. So I definitely understand having debilitating chronic illness. And I tried all sorts of different things from like extreme avoidance to really restrictive diets and hundreds of supplements every day and the coffee enemas every day and saunas and IV treatments and all of the things. And Finally, I heard about brain retraining and kind of as a last ditch effort of like, I mean, it can't hurt. This sounds crazy, but why not give it a try? I have nothing to lose. I literally have nothing else going on because at that point couldn't work, couldn't really socialize, couldn't leave my house. So I decided to give it a try. And I have this picture of me and my friend in her wedding dress because that is really what kind of motivated me to do the program. And because I really wanted to be able to fly from California to Alabama to be in my friend's wedding. And long story short, I was able to do that. For a little bit of context, like obviously with the mold sensitivities, leaving my house was very challenging, and as was flying across the country. But that was motivating me enough to like give this weird brain retraining thing a try. So I did. And it worked. And within a couple of months, I was no longer sensitive to mold at all. I had energy. I no longer had food sensitivities. I essentially could live life without these restrictions. Interestingly enough, I rechecked kind of my genetic testing, and that had changed because there can be a genetic component to some of these illnesses. And that had changed, and all signs of SIRS and inflammation in my body were gone, as shown in labs and testing. So that is very brief overview. And I specifically used, there's kind of now lots of different brain retraining programs. At the time, I only knew of one, which was DNRS, Dynamic Neural Retraining Systems. And I used that to recover myself. So I want to talk about what exactly is brain retraining. What is also the limbic system? How does that relate to this? And if you're wondering, like, what about my condition? I don't have mold toxicity. Will it help me? So a little bit of the science. We're going to dive into some of the science here. So what you need to know is some very basic things about the nervous system and neuroception. So neuroception is a process that happens automatically without your conscious awareness. It's happening all of the time. And it's basically your brain is taking in information from all of your senses, and your limbic system is filtering that information. Your insula and your amygdala are really filtering that information, taking all of the information from your senses, what you're seeing and smelling and hearing and feeling, and deciding if you are in danger or if you are safe. Is there a threat or is there not a threat? And so all of that is happening. And then that sends that information to then inform the nervous system of what it should do. So your nervous system has essentially, this is the autonomic nervous system, has 3 different modes. So I like to think of it as like 3 different rungs of a ladder. So you can see that on your screen here. And this is based on a theory called the polyvagal theory, which Stephen Porges developed initially, and then Deb Dana has taken some of his work and created this graphic here. But essentially, you need to understand just these 3 modes. At the top of the ladder is what we call ventral vagal. You might know of it as rest and digest. And this is the mode where we're designed to be most of the time. Like there's no danger, everything's okay. And in that mode, you are naturally calm, you're naturally relaxed, naturally curious, present. All of your organs and things are working well. You are operating off of what we call dose neurochemistry, which the dose stands for dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And in that mode, your body can heal itself. So we stay in this until that our nervous system, that our limbic system in our brain determines there's a threat. And when there's a threat, it activates our like threat response systems. It activates our protective systems. And those would be your sympathetic or your dorsal. The sympathetic, you probably know it as your fight or flight system. So that is when there's a threat, and then automatically that sympathetic system, we shift into sympathetic system. Our parts of our limbic system, like hypothalamus, start creating a different type of neurochemistry, like adrenaline and cortisol. And that really helps us to be able to fight a threat or run away or flight from a threat. And in those states, you're not going to feel naturally calm or relaxed. You don't need to feel calm and relaxed. You need to run away. You need to fight. So you're going to feel a little bit more of that like anxiousness or anger or fear, so that you can deal with that threat appropriately. And in that state too, it's really prioritizing energy and blood flow to your skeletal muscular system, because you need to fight or flight, right? So it's taking priority and energy and resources away from other systems in your body, like digestion, like your immune system, like detoxification, because you don't need those things to be working if there's a tiger chasing you, right? And so if your brain perceives that there's a threat and it perceives that you can't fight it and you can't outrun it, it's going to activate kind of like an emergency brake. It's like the next level of protection, which is what we call the dorsal vagal system, or kind of like a freeze or a shutdown mode. And this is as if there's a threat and you can't run, you can't fight it. So you're just going to lay down and play dead and hope that it just leaves you be, because that's going to deter it. So for us today, that dorsal shutdown mode feels naturally like hopelessness, maybe depression, maybe overwhelmed. It also feels like absolute fatigue, absolute overwhelming fatigue. It also decreases your ability to feel so that you feel less pain. Let's say this is a very primitive system. So when we're thinking about it in very primitive times of like hunter-gatherers or running away from the tiger, we want to kind of disassociate from the body in a protective way so that we don't feel the tiger or lion eating us as much. We're going to make this as comfortable as we possibly can. So in this state, it's also going to down-regulate some modes like detox and digestion and all of those things, because we don't need those in that state. So why do you need to know this? And how does this relate to chronic illness? Let's see. What can happen when what can happen is that with chronic illnesses, we can develop something called a limbic system impairment. And this is, we can also refer to that as a maladapted, in Spanish, mal equals bad. It's like a bad, like a maladapted, not the best adapted stress response. Meaning that this process of moving, we are actually meant to move in and out of these states. But what can happen is that you can develop a maladapted response where your limbic system is not perceiving things correctly. It's perceiving threats when there are no threats, when the threat has ended. And so it's activating the stress response or these protective mechanisms of sympathetic or dorsal when it doesn't need to. That's a healthy stress response would be, we spend most of our time up here at the top in ventral vagal. When there is a threat, we go into sympathetic or dorsal, but we're able to move back into ventral vagal when that threat is gone. A maladapted stress response is one that there's less flexibility, so it kind of gets stuck if we're supposed to be up here at the top of ventral vagal, a maladapted response gets stuck in that sympathetic fight or flight state, or stuck in that dorsal state. And how does that happen? And why does that happen? So it can be from a variety of different reasons, but a lot of times it has to do with some kind of acute trauma or prolonged stress. So sometimes we know what we know about trauma is that it does affect structures in our brain, particularly the limbic system. When we encounter some kind of trauma, and that can be a physical trauma, it could be an emotional trauma, it can be a biological trauma like a virus, or a really large exposure to a toxin that can affect the way that limbic system, it can actually change the structure of the limbic system and make the parts of your brain that detect threats, it can make it so that it doesn't detect them correctly, and it makes them more likely to detect threats where there isn't one. It makes those that threat response fire a lot faster. So it can be like an acute trauma, but also prolonged stress. If you are exposed to prolonged, even like low grade stress, this is also going to affect the way that the limbic system perceives danger. And it's almost like it gets stuck in that sympathetic state, where its home becomes that fight or flight state. It feels most safe there. It's like there's always stress, so there's always danger, so we're just going to stay in this state. And so it's kind of like its home base moves from rest and digest to sympathetic. You can't stay there for forever. So eventually then you move into dorsal, which is that extreme fatigue and shutdown state. But ultimately, kind of why that's a problem is when we're spending too much time sympathetic, like I said, it's going to, in that sympathetic state, it's down regulating your digestion. So your body's not actually absorbing as much of the food and the nutrients from the food and supplements you're taking. It can upregulate your immune function and then downregulate. So you might start having some autoimmune issues with the functioning of that immune system. It's going to downregulate your detoxification pathway. So you're not going to be able to detox toxins quite as regularly. Same thing. Eventually you'll then downregulate into dorsal. Same thing is going to happen. And so when all of these processes, these organ systems in your body are not working like they should, then obviously that can result in development of conditions like toxin-based conditions like mold toxicity, or certain things where body can't detox as it should. The brain also creates symptoms as warning signals to let us know, hey, there's a danger here. You need to escape this. So that would be akin to, like, say there is a hot stove. You put your hand on the hot stove. What's going to happen? You're going to feel pain. That's a warning signal. That pain is not created in your hand. Pain doesn't come from our body. All pain is created in the brain. So you put your hand on the hot stove. There are receptors, like sensory receptors in your skin, that detect a really high temperature. That information goes to your brain, to the limbic system. The limbic system says, wow, from this sense of we can feel the temperature, that's not safe. We're going to send the warning signal. What's that warning signal? Pain. So that we take our hand off of it. It's very necessary and protective, right? So in the same way, your brain, the limbic system, can start sending you warning signals. And some of those warning signals can be fatigue, brain fog, all sorts of things. So that's when we talk about sensitivities. That is usually the brain has made a cross wiring. This is where part of that limbic system impairment that is caused a cross wiring where your brain perceives things as threatening that actually are safe, but we experience reactions to them. So that can be like things like I mentioned, mold. That can be things like movement, like expanding, like when we use any type of energy, exercise, can be sensitivities to different foods. It can be sensitivities to light, to sound, to EMFs. All of those things are just cross-wiring in the brain due to a limbic system impairment caused by some changes in the brain from trauma or prolonged stress. So if I haven't said this clearly, gonna kind of the overview of it is so much of chronic illness is related to the limbic system. First, in that limbic system impairment, the brain, because of trauma or some type of experience, the brain gets confused, gets cross-wired, where it has started to perceive things as dangerous that are not, like molds, like foods, like EMFs, blah, blah, blah. And then thus sends warning signals to us. And those warning signals look very different, can look a lot of different ways. But then also there are just secondary, just natural consequences of being in a dysregulated state, being in sympathetic or dorsal for a long period of time because of what that does to primarily our digestive system, our detoxification pathways, and our immune system. So many different things fall under that category. This can account for chronic fatigue, brain fog, food sensitivities, like I've said, all these other sensitivities, anxiety, that's mostly a sympathetic dominant state. Depression is mostly a dorsal dominant state. Insomnia, if you have a lot of sympathetic neurochemistry, that's going to make it very hard to sleep. POTS, Lyme disease, chronic pain, migraines, autoimmune, long COVID, histamine intolerance, all sorts of things are related to any kind of vestibular issues. I'm trying to think what else. There's skin issues. There's so many different things that are involved in this, but those are some of the most common ones. So what do we do that? What do we do about that? What's the solution? And the solution is to rewire the brain and retrain your brain. And brain retraining is one way to do that. And what it's doing, what programs like DNRS, SCPTA, Primal Trust, Vital Sight, all these things are doing we are giving the brain corrective feedback and letting it know, hey, we're not in danger. I know you think that we're in danger right now, so you're putting us into this protective stress response, but we don't need to be. So it gives tools and strategies for how to do that. It's also desensitizing the amygdala to where in a limbic system impairment, the amygdala is very sensitive and it doesn't take a lot to trigger that stress response. It's almost like trigger happy. You kind of might feel like, I used to be able to handle all of these things, but now I can't handle just like the smallest triggers or stress. And that's due to that amygdala sensitivity. So we use tools in brain retraining that desensitize the amygdala. It is also creating, so a lot of this is happening because of automatic neural pathways in the brain that are created. And the cool thing about neuroplasticity, which just means that your brain is malleable and can change, is that we can create new pathways. The brain loves energy efficiency, so it's going to use whatever pathways are most worn or most utilized. Kind of like if you're walking in a national park in the forest, you're probably going to stick to a path because that's going to be the easiest way to find your way through. And it's kind of like that in the brain where it's going to use whatever's most worn, but that doesn't mean that that's the most helpful healthy pathway in the brain. And the cool thing about just like in nature, we can create pathways in the brain. And we do that through consistency and repetition using something called a brain retraining round. And this is a cognitive top-down approach. So there's a lot that goes into these brain retraining programs, but one piece of it is a brain retraining round. And it's different from program to program, but just to give an idea of like, well, what is brain retraining? It's teaching you components. It's got neuro-linguistic programming. There's some visualization components to it. There's a lot of science that goes into creating this and what goes into around, but essentially you're becoming aware of the pathways your brain is using. And that might be a pathway of, okay, I was just exposed to this trigger and now I feel this symptom. Oh, my brain is using this pathway that is a dangerous thing. I need to then activate that stress response. So we're becoming aware of those and we're interrupting them. When you interrupt a pathway, it weakens it. And then we bring our awareness to the fact that we have a choice to choose a different pathway or create a pathway. Next, some bring in elements of somatic tools or grounding, which just help discharge some stress neurochemistry. And then you are creating a new neural pathway in the form of like an affirmation. And then we use visualizations. Why do we use visualization? There's so much here, but essentially it's using the mind and the imagination to create a visualization because your brain doesn't know the difference between what you're imagining is happening and what is actually happening. And we use visualizations for two main reasons. One is because imagining certain things can then trigger the release of specific neurochemistry that's really helpful to shift your state into that rest and digest state, to desensitize the amygdala. We also use it to create new neural patterns and pathways and connections. So there is a saying that neurons that fire together, wire together. So we're creating new like associations and connections with things that maybe the brain thought were harmful in the past, but we're teaching it, oh, actually, no, this is okay. I can eat this food, or I can be around this trigger. And we make positive associations with them so that our brain doesn't then get triggered by them. So this is how I was able to heal from my sensitivity the sensitivity I was experiencing to mold and chemicals and foods and things. So that is as brief as I can make it, the overview of chronic illness, its connection to the limbic system, what a limbic system impairment is, and then what brain retraining is. There's a lot more that goes into kind of brain retraining, and it is definitely a commitment. Most programs ask that you commit to doing it every day for about 6 months. So you have to really be in that place where you're experiencing enough discomfort or pain that you're willing to put in that work, but it's absolutely 100% worth it to do that, in my opinion, for sure. But if you do decide to do that and want help along the way to sort this out and figure this out, I actually coach people that are going through brain retraining programs now. And these are ways that you can get in touch with me, and I offer free phone consults to see if we might for you to hear about my coaching, me to understand what's going on with you, see if we'd be a good fit. But for me, coaching was an integral part of making it successful for me. But for today, just want you to know that all this talk about brain and neural pathways, the chronic, I think it's important to say too, of like chronic illness, if you experience any type of chronic illness, that's 100% real. Those symptoms are real. The diagnosis, what's happening in your body, the labs, all of these things. I'm not saying it's all in your head. It's not real. It absolutely is. And it's all of those diagnoses are also real. Those things are really happening in your body. But what we are talking about is kind of the layer below, that the very root cause of why is this happening. Someone might say, well, I have chronic inflammation in my body, and that's why that's happening, or I have this or that. And yes, 100%, that's real. But why? Why do you have that? Why is your body not detoxing? Why are your mitochondria not working the way that they should? Why is all of this happening? And at the root of it is usually a dysregulated nervous system, which is then caused behind that by an overly sensitive and cross-wired limbic system. So if you're like me and have spent years and ungodly amounts of money trying to treat this from a Western and then also holistic approach of all of these doctors that don't take insurance and supplements and diets, this is most likely the absolute root cause of what is going on, and going to be the best investment in your healing process, that you can stop all these crazy protocols that are not working and get to the root and rewire your brain and get back to living how you want to live. So hope this was helpful for you. Please reach out to me on Instagram or email if you have any questions or need more support. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.